Good afternoon. I'm Natalia Muñoz-Rojas, the Enriqueta Harris Frankfort Curatorial Assistant of Paintings at the Wallace Collection, where this painting is. Painted in Velázquez's studio around 1636, it depicts Prince Baltasar Carlos, aged 7, riding his horse in front of his apartments at the Palace of the Buen Retiro, on the outskirts of Madrid. This is a complex image, a combination of royal portraiture and a genre scene. Here, the artist conveys a strong political message and gives us insight into the upbringing of the heir to the Spanish throne, all by allowing the viewer to enter parts of the court never seen before. There are many questions surrounding this painting: its attribution, dating, the reason why it was painted. Recently, the painting underwent cleaning and restoration, and we also carried out technical analysis, something which has allowed us to find out more about it. The project was kindly funded by the Centro de Estudios Europa Hispánica. Today, I would like to tell you a bit more about the painting, about Baltasar Carlos and his upbringing, and also about the restoration of the painting and the ongoing research I am carrying on about it. So, what does the painting show? In the foreground, we see Prince Baltasar Carlos, the son of Philip IV of Spain and his first wife, Isabel of Bourbon. He is dressed in a black suit, silver gloves and hose, and a crimson sash. We often find portraits of army generals wearing this same colored sash. It identifies the prince as Captain General of the Spanish armies. His dress is highly significant too. He wears grecuescos, longer and less puffy trousers than the usual trousers of the 17th century, and a plain balona, which was a simpler version of the traditional gorget or lechuguilla. He is dressed in the fashion of the reign of Philip IV, which followed the anti-sumptuary and austerity laws passed in an attempt to curb expenditure. With his arm akimbo, he is shown riding a black pony. Philip IV often referred to Baltasar Carlos's talents as a rider in his letters to his brother Ferdinand, who lived in Italy. As a reward, Ferdinand sent the young prince a pony stallion, described as a little devil. According to the 19th century scholar Carl Justi, this might be the pony here depicted. Despite the devilish fame of the pony, the 7-year-old prince seems to be able to control him effortlessly. He is performing a complex maneuver. The pony lifts his front 2 legs, putting all the weight on his hind ones. It has long been discussed whether he is doing a levade, which consists of the horse standing and carrying all the weight on his hind legs, or a terre-à-terre, in which the horse lifts both front legs simultaneously, putting them down, and then moving the hind legs closer to the front ones simultaneously. Regardless, these are complex maneuvers that are clearly demonstrating the abilities of the young rider. Directly behind the prince, we see several members of the court. Dressed in black and red is a court dwarf, possibly Francisco Lezcano, who had entered the service of the young prince in 1634. In front of the horse stands Juan Mateos, the king's master of hounds, who had written a book on the origins and dignity of hunting, where he appears portrayed, enabling us to recognize him. Juan Mateos is being hunted a tilting lance by another dwarf. This is a child-sized lance, much smaller and lighter than what an adult rider would have used. Finally, in front of the prince is another sketchy and finished figure, dressed in a cloak and hat. I think that he seems like a rugged figure, slightly out of place in this courtly setting, but as we will later see, he might give some clues for the identification of the artist. Moving further back, we find one of the most interesting fragments of the composition, a tilting yard. Composed of 3 parallel wooden barriers that create 2 lanes, we see a rider riding between them, foreshadowing the exercise the prince is about to engage in. Behind the rider, we see a walking figure. Interestingly, there is a letter from the Prime Minister, Count Duke Olivares, that describes the prince's love of running at the tilt. The letter mentions that he took no breaks from this activity, practicing it even during Easter, a time of reclusion, and that his constant activity would leave the servants running behind him exhausted. I really like this detail of the painting because it is rare to find a written document that confirms the meaning of a things represented on a painting. Without Olivares' letter, it might have been harder to determine why the man was running behind the horse. Lastly, it is important to note that the wooden barriers reach the rider's knees. Tilting barriers usually reach the rider's underarm, so the fact that they are so low down indicate that they were built in measure for a child and his pony. This and the child lands clearly point at what Baltasar Carlos is about to do. Beyond the tilt yard, we find a group of figures, riders, and a carriage. The Retiro was on the outskirts of Madrid and wasn't the main royal palace. It was a place of enjoyment and art that was only lived in a few weeks a year. The carriage might be taking people to or from the Alcázar, the royal family's main residence. Finally, the last group of figures is found on the balcony. Two women and a little girl, possibly a dwarf, look down from the palace to the tilt yard, demonstrating the spectacle aspect of the scene. Despite the monastery-like architecture of the building, which was indeed started as an extension of the Hieronymite monastery, the palace was a place of luxury and spectacle, where all great festivities took place. It was started for the ceremony when the courts of Castile swore allegiance to the prince, and was expanded to reach monumental dimensions by Count Duke Olivares. The palace was hastily built, using cheap materials, which meant it quickly went into disrepair, so that by the end of the Peninsular War, there was nothing left of it. This highly original composition is a combination of equestrian portraiture and genre scene. It is a steep departure from previous equestrian portraits and breaks the sober and restrained conventions of Spanish royal portraiture. The thinly and sketchily painted scene unrolling behind the prince takes the viewer deep into areas of the court never seen before, where less formal activities took place. The courtly genre scene follows closely after the boar hunt, which now hangs in the National Gallery, and it foreshadows Velázquez's great paintings, Las Meninas, in the way it uses an informal setting for a royal portrait. The first question that this complex composition raises is why it might have been painted. Baltasar Carlos's figure recalls previous equestrian royal portraits and follows a line of royal portraiture initiated by Titian with his portrait of Emperor Charles V. These portraits often depict the subject prominently in the foreground, occupying a large portion of the composition, in front of an idealized landscape, a battle scene, or perhaps allegorical figures that sing the sitters' praises. They show the subject as an accomplished rider, in full control of their horse and therefore of their kingdom. The scene behind the prince is highly significant too. On the 4th of February 1636, Prince Baltasar Carlos practiced tilting for the first time. The event was recorded in Madrid's records of princely births, royal visits, and special events. The event was clearly incredibly important, as it is recorded on the same page as the birth of one of Baltasar Carlos's sisters, the death of a cardinal, and that of the poet Lope de Vega. Additionally, the only mentions of the prince in the whole book are the oath of allegiance of the Castilian courts to him, his death, and this very event. It is clearly something very special. Tilting followed a strong chivalrous tradition, as it demonstrated the abilities of commanders of armies and heads of state. However, by the 17th century, physical sports that could result in serious injury or even death, something that could happen if the rider running at the tilt had, for example, a bad fall, were slowly losing ground as people were no longer willing to engage in such dangerous activities. So I think it is significant that the artist has chosen to depict the princess practicing tilting, rather than, for example, the cane game, a game that was more popular at the time. By doing so, the prince is shown as the heir of Spain's great chivalrous tradition and demonstrates that, like his previous rulers, he would be able to rule his country and lead the armies to victory. The Retiro was also an important building, symbolic of the king's powers. The king's first minister, the Count Duke Olivares, built it for the king to portray his power, much like Louis XIV built Versailles. The palace was built at a time of steep decline in the Spanish Empire, war in the Dutch provinces, and loss of colonies to the English, as well as poorly managed collection of taxes, meant that Spain's empire was quickly losing territories, and the constant wars meant that the state's bursary were being drained. When Philip IV arrived into power, he attempted to pass austerity laws to curb and control expenses following the council of Count Duke Olivares. The reign of Philip III, his predecessor, had been disastrous, with the king having left all ruling in the hands of his first minister, the Count of Lerma, who became a hated character due to his extravagant style and continuous tax raises. So, in an attempt to move away from the Duke of Lerma, the Count Duke Olivares attempted to become, or at least appear, more austere. As part of this, for example, he passed anti-sumptuary laws that encourage a more restrained dress code, such as the one the prince wears in the picture. However, the birth of the prince put an end to the austerity measures. The prince brought new hopes to the Habsburg monarchs in Spain, as he was the long-awaited male heir to the throne. Yet, these hopes were misplaced. Baltasar Carlos died at the age of 14 in Zaragoza. With his death, Carlos III, son of Philip IV and his second wife Mariana of Austria, became the heir to the Spanish throne. He was not a good monarch, and eventually Spain started a civil war, the War of Secession, that would eventually end the Habsburg rule of Spain and start the Bourbon line. But looking at this picture, one cannot help to wonder what would have been the fate of Spain if Baltasar Carlos had grown to become king and to fulfill his role as a chivalrous monarch. Not only is this a complex image because of what it depicts, but also because of its authorship and relationship to the painting fully attributed to Velázquez, now in a private collection. The privately owned painting also depicts Baltasar Carlos at the riding school, has some key differences with the Wallace version, particularly in the figures present. Besides the prince and Juan Mateos, also present in the privately owned picture are the prince's valet, Alonso Martinez de Espinar, who hands the tilting lance to the Count Duke Olivares. Moreover, in the background, where the two women and the girl are depicted in the Wallace picture, are the king and queen, with a woman behind them, possibly the wife of Count Duke Olivares, who was one of the queen's ladies-in-waiting. In the privately owned version, the characters obscured the tilting yard, which is no longer visible. It is only thanks to the Wallace picture that we can determine the activity that is about to take place in the other version. In the privately owned picture, the Count Duke portrays himself as the mentor of the prince. His prominent position in the composition shows his importance in the upbringing of the prince, and as such his importance to the Spanish kingdom. The painting was in the family of the heirs to the Duke, which could suggest it was painted for him. It has often been debated that the privately owned version was the prime version, and that the Wallace painting was the secondary version, painted after 1642, when Olivares fell from grace from the king and was expelled from court. However, the recent cleaning and technical analysis of the painting shows that the relationship between both versions might be more complex than that. In 2019, it was decided that it would be beneficial for the painting to be cleaned, as a dark yellow varnish obscured the details and distorted the image. The painting was firstly taken to the Curatorial Institute of Art, where we carried out technical analysis to have X-rays and infrareds of it. These are very useful because they allow us to see what is beneath the surface of the painting. X-rays show the different paint layers and might reveal changes in the composition or later overpainted areas, which often appear in a darker color. Infrared is used to reveal drawings made with carbon material, such as charcoal or a dry point, which might usually be obscured by the paint. Lastly, we also took samples of paint to analyze the pigment composition. This helps to determine what materials were used, whether colors might have changed, as natural pigments often do with time, and also give us a chance to compare the results with the samples taken from the other version. Following the technical analysis, the painting was taken to a restorer, who carefully removed the layer of yellow varnish and the areas of overpainting. These were then refilled so that no blank spaces were left. Following this, the canvas was relined. Canvases are often stretched, or they start to sag with age, so often, to prevent all the threads from loosening completely, the old original canvas is stuck onto a new one. The problem is that in the past, this was done quite brutally, so that the original picture was completely flattened and ironed against the new one, often causing damage and overstretching. So we decided it would be best for the picture to have its old relining removed and replaced by a new, gentler one. In the process of doing this, we were very lucky to find something on the original canvas. Painted on the reverse of the painting was an old inventory number, which we are currently investigating to determine whether it might link to any of the provenance we already have, or if it might provide a new piece of information. If any of you recognize the handwriting or might have any ideas of its dating, please do let me know. As well as the finding of the inventory number, the cleaning and technical analysis allowed us to make other findings. Firstly, the cleaning revealed a few pentimenti and changes in the composition. For example, we found a shadow which looks like could be another horse, or the figure behind the dwarf, which could possibly be a dog. We also found that the neck of the prince's horse had changed position slightly. All of this might indicate that there were changes being made to the painting whilst it was painted, and that therefore the whole composition had not been worked out completely previously. The infrared did not show any traces of drawing under the painted surface, though this does not necessarily mean that there wasn't any originally. If the artist had used chalk, for example, it might have faded without leaving trace. However, it is interesting to note that when both versions are superimposed, the figure of Baltasar Carlos corresponds almost exactly with that of the privately owned version. Research on Velázquez's early work demonstrates that he often used tracings of his composition, so that he could repeat the same motifs without having to draw them from scratch. Could he have done the same here? Additionally, the pigment analysis and cross-sections we took of the painted surface also showed some interesting results. They showed that the ground layer, a layer of paint or stucco that was laid on canvases to smoothen the surface before starting to paint or draw, is composed of the same materials in both paintings. It is made up of a series of materials which Velázquez often used in his paintings after his first trip to Italy. This might indicate that both paintings were painted in Velázquez's studio, where such a ground would have been available. The figure of the prince in both paintings is very similar, yet other figures and the way in which the sky or buildings are painted are very differently stylistically to Velázquez's work. Velázquez was Philip IV's court painter. He was the king's official portraitist and was charged with painting all his portraits. A decree was even passed saying that all portraits of the king and his family had to be based or approved by Velázquez. He was in full control of the image of the king. Not only was he a painter, but also a member of the court, who was charged with important tasks such as the organization of the wedding between Louis XIV and the Spanish princess Maria Teresa. However, to produce such a large quantity of portraits, he would have needed the help of a studio. Yet very little is known of it. This is partly due to the fact that the artist himself tried to deny he had ever had one. At the end of his life, Velázquez was accepted into the Order of Santiago, an extremely prestigious order which only accepted noblemen. In order to be accepted, Velázquez had to prove he was a nobleman, and therefore he had to prove he had never worked for money. This included removing any evidence of having had a studio and having done anything besides painting for his own pleasure. Yet when we compare this painting to works by other artists working in Madrid at the time, and who might have worked in Velázquez's studio, we are able to find some similarities. For example, the rugged figure is very close to one painted by Madrileñan artist Benito Manuel Agüero, whose figures also have these stick-like legs. Though it is not yet possible to find a firm attribution for the painting, these findings point to the fact that it is likely that the painting was both by the hand of Velázquez and his studio. This, however, does not really resolve the questions about its dating and commission. Could it be a sketch for the privately owned painting, painted at the same time? Could it be a later version? Or could it have been commissioned by another member of the court who also wished to portray himself as the prince's tutor, like Olivares had done? In any case, it is likely that this is an unfinished picture, both because of the sketchy nature of the background and because it was in Velázquez's studio at the time of his death. This brings us to the end of my talk, as I would like to discuss the painting's provenance briefly. Having stayed in Velázquez's studio until his death, the painting was then possibly in the collection of the Duchess of Huescar, who died in 1784. After that, the painting was recorded as having been in the collection of José de Madrazo, a Spanish neoclassical painter. There are many blanks in the early provenance history of the painting, but hopefully, thanks to the inventory number found on the back of the canvas, we may be able to fill some of this in. The painting was then acquired by English dealer Woodburn on behalf of the collector Samuel Rogers, a poet and renowned connoisseur. Our painting is recorded in a drawing as having hung behind Reynolds' Laughing Girl and Tintoretto's Miracle of St. Mark in the drawing room above the chimney. Such a hung clearly shows that the painting was very much liked by Rogers. When he died, Rogers' collection was sold at Christie's, in a much-anticipated auction, in which, of course, the fourth Marquess of Hereford participated through his agent Mawson. The painting was highly recommended by Mawson, who described it as a copy of the painting by Velázquez in private hands, and as one of the gems of the sale. Enticed by this, the fourth Marquess bought it and hung it alongside his beloved paintings, to which he referred to as his children. The painting has since become one of the most beloved pictures in the Wallace Collection, and one of the most mysterious ones, though we hope that with further research we may slowly untangle these mysteries.